everybody. Welcome back to Unfuck It. This is our very, very fun podcast where we sit and we talk about things that are fucked in the world of work, and we bring on smart people to try to solve those problems, or at the very least give us an indication of where the exit might be. If you've seen the show, or if you haven't, you might know me. My name's Dwayne Lay. I'm one of your hosts. Over to my physical left, but probably your screen right, is my co-host, Crystal Lay, who I've known for, gosh, it feels like years, yeah?
I mean, it has been years, and I think this New Year's Eve is it 9 years? 9 years we've been married? So
9 years married. But we've known each other for, gosh, at least months before
15
that.
years.
15,
yeah, 15
something
years.
like that. But hey, we're not alone, so it's not all about us. So we have with us our guest and author of the talent trifecta, Kara Yarnott. Kara, would you like to introduce yourself to the folks?
Yes, thank you. I'm Kara Yarnott, founder and CEO of Meritage Talent Solutions. Thrilled to be here with both of you today.
And we are thrilled to have you. So what is on your mind today? What do you want to talk about that, in your esteemed and educated opinion, is totally fucked?
So in my opinion, what's totally fucked in the world of work is how we select and promote managers in the workplace.
Okay.
In my time in corporate America, which was the first 17 years of my career, and then my last 14 as a consultant, I just see it time and time again that we put people into first-line supervisor, manager type roles that are not screened or selected based on their ability to actually lead, motivate, manage, help people in their actual day-to-day jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually leads to a lot of the turnover problems that we have in our companies, which a lot of organization executives focus on. I talk about this in my book in the retention part of the trifecta, and that really gets to a core problem.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pieces of research I fell upon when I was researching the book was Gallup's State of the American Worker report. There were two really interesting things in that report. One was a survey they did of American workers, and they surveyed 1 million American workers, and 75% of them said they had left a job in their career because of the manager. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is shocking information to anybody. Most of us have probably left a job because of our manager.
I say it actually feels a little low.
Yeah, that's a good point. But on the flip side of that, years of studies they had done, they found that only 10% of American workers have the natural propensity to be a manager, to have the natural skills to be a manager. Crystal.
I would say, I think that's probably a really good place to kind of pause and have some discussion.
Yes.
Because to me, what you're talking about is the Peter Principle at work, right? Like it's the Peter Principle in practice. Say that 5 times fast.
Yes. The Peter Principle, pick to pack the pickled peppers.
Yeah, okay, we all know you can say it. I'm talking about the average person.
But sounds like you practiced.
Right. So for anyone listening who's not familiar, the Peter Principle, Peter and Hull, it's a long-standing management piece of research that management professionals and organizations have looked at since the late 60s, early 70s. I don't remember exactly when that came out, but it's talking about the tendencies companies have to promote employees based on success in their prior roles as opposed to hiring for the role they're going into.
Yes.
Right. So I think when you're talking about the natural propensity to manage and lead being like 1 in 10, that feels right to me based off of what I remember of all the kids I went to school with. Like I was clearly the one that was good to be in charge. Anyway, now whether they agree with that is a different thing, right? But but the point is, most of us aren't born with the skills, competencies, and knowledge to be able to manage and lead. So do we look at someone's previous role and go, okay, you did well here, so maybe you're just a high performer, and if we gave you the right skill sets, you would be good in this management role. Like if we trained you and taught you how to lead and all of these things, you would be a good leader. Or do we look for the good leader, not worry about the lack of technical aptitude in the roles they would be managing, and focus on their ability to manage?
Right. And so I think there's got to be a balance, because that Gallup study also found there's another 20% of people, if we gave them the training and coaching, could be good leaders. So there's somewhere in that 30% of people with the natural ability and those with the propensity with coaching and training, and possibly the technical skills in the world that they're trying to lead, that we should be focusing on finding to put into those management roles, instead of just making the best salesperson the sales manager, and the best engineer the engineering manager, and the best procurement person who can negotiate a great deal doesn't necessarily mean they can manage good procurement people.
Well, and I think that's a really good point too. Like, because you're really good in a prior role, you get promoted into management role, which means you're no longer in the role that was driving the revenue for the organization to begin with. There's a balance, because you don't want to send the message to people that if you're good at your job, you can't ever be in leadership, because we don't want to lose you in that role. Right. But if you aren't part of that 30% that's really keyed to be able to manage and lead, then there's a question of, okay, if we take you out of what you're good at, that's probably not good for you, right? You're going to become a maladapted manager either in this position or elsewhere, because people tend to not want to go backwards in their careers. So they continue to stay in this ill-fit role, or you're not really helping, or maybe it's I don't know. I haven't had enough coffee, but they're also like hurting the company, right? So why would we not look at early on finding that 30% early in their career? And I'm talking about maybe not even in their career. If we're talking about competencies, I think you start to see natural leadership capabilities emerge as early as middle school, right? In a meaningful way, right? So why aren't we going the route of some of the companies in the APAC region of the world, or countries in the APAC region of the world, that are looking at the things that are necessary to be positive leaders, role models, great technical oriented, whatever your aptitude is, and then training you for those sets of roles and jobs? Like, why are we still functioning off of the what do you want to be when you grow up mentality? I wanted to be a surgeon, but I can't cut in a straight line.
Right. That's an excellent point, because, there are good leaders, in my opinion and my experience, can lead in a variety of environments. And you need a base level of understanding of the function that you're trying to lead. And good leaders also tend to be curious people who learn quickly, and can find the right people to teach them what are the major pieces of knowledge I need to understand what drives these employees, what do I need to know about the supply chain, whatever it might be.
I mean, if you listen to
those people.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to hot gossip in the HCI industry, it's the whole reason I married Dwayne, was to make up for the skill sets that I lacked. So, all good.
I did not know we were a topic of hot goss.
I mean, not anymore. This was a long time ago, but yeah.
Yes. At least.
Well, so is the supposition here that the leaders are born, but they can't be made? And if we think that there's some, and I understand like the innate leadership piece, like for some people, but are we really saying that, like, yeah, we should at middle school determine whether or not you get to lead?
No, what I'm saying is that there are people that are naturally inclined in that direction. And for the people who are naturally inclined, we should develop that early, instead of waiting for them to fumble their way through the technical pieces that maybe they won't ever be great at, but they have all of the core competencies to be truly great leaders. Develop that, right? And that's not to say that you can't also make someone into a competent or good leader. I'm not sure you can make someone who doesn't have those innate qualities into a great leader, though. Right. And so it's looking at that ABC principle in terms of talent, right? If you can identify those A players early and shape their career early in their, like early, the earlier we can get in and develop those natural tendencies into true competencies, I think the better.
Well, and I think what we have backwards in the traditional way we look at things here, particularly in the US, is if someone with those natural tendencies towards being a great leader does not have a natural technical competency in some sort of field, we may never find them, because they won't bubble to the top in whatever field they choose of what they want to be when they grow up. They may never be a top performer. So we may not identify them as someone to promote into a leadership role, to promote to a manager, because they were never a top performer. Because those are the people that we tend to put into those leadership roles, because they were the best at their individual contributor job. So we may never find them.
I think that's like, not to use a lot of personal stories, right? But it's easy to draw back on your own experience. And I remember there's a company that I worked with very, very briefly, like about a year, maybe a year and a half. You won't find them on my LinkedIn because I refuse to give them any sort of visibility or promotion because their CEO was just the most awful CEO I've ever worked with. Not a bad person, just a really bad leader. But one of the things that I remember him saying was, "Hey, Crystal, I don't know that you're worth $80,000. And I was like, "Oh, that's a bad assessment on your part. Like what's making you say that? Like, I know the revenue that I've driven, I know what I've done in my career to date, and it's worth a hell of a lot more than 80 grand. So where are you getting that?" Right. And it was simply just the role that he had envisioned for me in his organization, which was not the right role for me from jump. And we all knew it wasn't one where I could achieve what he wanted. And it was like, well, if you actually put me in the right role and let me just go, I'll make you a ton of money. Well, I don't know that you can do that because you couldn't prove it here. And I think that's kind of your point, right? Like, he was super wrong. And I managed to make millions of dollars for the next company that I worked with because they took the time to understand what I was good at and what I wasn't. And I think that's something that I think companies struggle with, particularly when they hit to enterprise level and scale, is like being able to go back and look at each individual and say, what are you good at, really?
Right.
And that feels like an OD and learning and development miss for me, right? Like L&D often gets brought in at like a very generic level as opposed to looking at individual micro plans.
Right.
But maybe that would be better. We could attack the leadership issue that way if we were pulling into individual plans.
Right. Well, and I even think, yes, ideally we could turn things on its head and start trying to identify some of these competencies early for kids, middle school, high school. But even I think about, the employers that hire a lot of early career talent people, they could start assessing some of these things in those big cohorts and at least starting to develop them there instead of a little bit of their upper out mentality. You're a really good analyst, or you're a really good accountant, or you're a really good salesperson. And those are the people that tend to rise. And they may be missing out on some great leadership talent just because they haven't taken the time to identify who that is, and they might be sending the wrong people out, because there's plenty of stories of people who started at a big four and didn't make it past year four, and they're elsewhere as CEOs, they're elsewhere as great leadership roles, and it's not because they didn't have the talent to be successful at those places where they first started. Those organizations didn't take the time to identify those competencies.
Yeah, well, and they probably weren't scaled correctly too. Like, I remember really early, my HR career was all accident, right? Like, I was never supposed to be in HR.
You're the only one, by the way.
I doubt that very highly, Dwayne. But I was never supposed to be in HR, right? Like, I was hired to be a corporate recruiter, and I walked in on day one or two, maybe it was day two, because the CEO wasn't there on day one, and they're like, by the way, you now run HR. And I was like, I have absolutely no experience in that, but if you give me a SURE membership, I can probably figure it out. And I did, right? I muddled through it. But they brought in this organizational consultant for me, and her name was Emma Shin. I think she's passed on at this point, but she's got a couple of really good books around organizational development and how you grow companies to be in alignment so that your people and the way that you're structured is in alignment with your revenue. And so one of the things that she talked about with me was like, companies have inflection points where they're able to either appropriately grow their organization from a people perspective, or they don't. And if they don't, they can't go backwards and fix it because they get too entrenched in the where they're at in scale. So it's really important to go and make sure you're doing it right as you move along. Well, most organizations are done. Right? Like, they are what they're going to be now. You're not going to look at AT&T and say, hey, you know what? You didn't actually grow your organization correctly, because they have the same number of employees as some countries, right? More than some countries.
Yes.
So they're stuck with kind of what they have. But when you look at like the tech companies that are still growing, all of the, I was reading somewhere 2/3 or something of our businesses in the United States are still considered to be scaling organizations. And so when you look at scaling organizations, like, you're still in a spot where you could really look at how do I need to set up from an organizational perspective to allow for that kind of individual attention at scale? And there's so much technology that can help with that. Like, I don't know that there's an excuse not to.
Right. That's a really good point. There is so much technology now. And when we're thinking about skills-based development, skills-based hiring, I think we're still ways away from that. People talk about it, but that's a whole nother podcast. But skills, but there's ways to capture that, and there's lots of tools to help you do that and identify that when you're thinking about succession planning and those types of things. Who are the people in our organization that do have these competencies, and added to that, as you scale, what manager training, manager coaching programs do we put in from the beginning so that those 20% of people that with coaching and development could be good managers, we're already ready for?
Yeah, I think the research bears you out there too. Like, for those of you who have not listened, which I guess is everybody right now because we haven't actually pushed out the recorded episodes, but by the time this airs, there will be episodes. So for anybody who's listened, like, I'm going to throw out studies like it's my job. I love them. I think we learn a lot from the research that's already been done, and meta-analysis on this particular topic does show that leadership potential and managerial effectiveness are really better predicted by things that are innate to us, like personality traits and leadership competencies, than prior performance. And that is Hogan and Kaiser is the one that did that research. It's back from like the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. So when you look at that thought process, the IO in me says, okay, well, we need to get more comfy with assessments, like at the beginning of the employment process, because if we were to assess this at jump, instead of how effective are you in managing in this org, like how effective are you in leadership from a personality perspective, from the competency perspective? What are you, right? Like, let us understand your personality and your competencies, and then that gets mapped to L&D around like, okay, based off these competencies, here's how we think they can grow. It probably feels a little weird from an individual perspective, right? Like my future at this company is kind of being mapped out for me early into this process. But on the other hand, it would help them excel in whatever it is they're going to do there.
Right. Well, and now you're just peeking something in the talent acquisition strategist in me. What if we set an overall macro goal for a talent acquisition team that if we're using assessments as a part of our selection process, just understand the competencies of the people coming in the door. If we set a goal for each major department, that new hires that are coming in the door, roughly 40% of them possess the competencies of leaders. It doesn't have to be a requirement for a specific job, but collectively, we want to infuse the organization with those competencies so that we know for succession planning and we know for promotion that we're bringing those competencies into the organization, and we're tracking that so that when we're handing them off to our L&D friends, they're there. And they can start developing those skills amongst the population that already has some of them. So when management positions become available, we can hire from within of people that have the technical skills because they've been doing the jobs, and we don't have to go out searching for them. We can do those promotions from within, and our TA job can be to look for the individual contributor job roles more regularly, and we can be more specialized, but we're assessing for competencies as well, just as an FYI, but that can be our bigger goal. That could be really
I think
fascinating.
I think that fits really well. It actually fits really well in SHL's Universal Competency Framework. So when you're looking at that framework stresses future-oriented potential over past results. So when you start out at an organization, all you have is future-oriented potential, right? Like you have no past results in that company. Right. So, whether you're using it for selection or you're using it as once we've hired, now that we've hired you, let's understand all that you can be, like the old Army commercials, and might be all that you can be, right? But I'm not sure. I've always kind of looked at it as like assess that stuff once they're in, so that you're not reliant on a manager who also has hiring responsibilities to understand what these competencies really mean. But that said, doing it beforehand in the way that you're discussing, like, is a really interesting idea. I think at national and global scale, the way that works is if we then start looking at that framework, that universal framework, and bringing that all the way back into primary and secondary education, right? Because what'll happen under your model is if you're saying we want 40% to be hired with the competencies for leadership, but only 3 in 10 possess those natural competencies, you're going to run out, right? Like that doesn't work at scale. Right. So we have to teach to them at the point in time that people are still malleable in terms of personality and competency. And there's a lot of debate academically and in psychology practitioners on whether or not personality is malleable. But I mean, the reality is your innate personality may not be fundamentally changeable. You're kind of born in a lot of ways with your personality traits, but there's enough research that shows the expression of that personality is malleable, right? So if the expression is malleable, and we know competencies are trainable, like pulling that back into the education realm, and again, nurturing that which is a little more natural might bump that 30% to 40 or 50%, right?
Right, because it may only be 30% because we haven't done any of that work in primary and secondary education previously. Because, I think of one of the competencies that Gallup called out in that study was creating an environment of accountability. We can train people to create an environment of accountability. I feel confident that we can train people to do that, but we do have to start earlier because it makes some people incredibly uncomfortable, and some people we're never going to teach to do that, but others understand what it is, and they just need to know what the tools are to put that in place and how to be better about communicating accountability. And we can start that earlier in so many different types of interventions, like, being the team captain when you are in middle school and high school, and how do you hold your teammates accountable? You can learn that in different ways, and being, the ever dreaded group project.
Still dread those. Post-secondary education, I still prefer solo projects.
So it raises a good question, though, is if you're talking about your high performers, the ones who get promoted. And I've always found it an interesting concept to look at. If you take the best person on your team and you promote them, like the damage you've done to your team, you've just taken your best performer off, right? And then you've handed that reduced squad to a new manager, right? You're almost just asking for them to fail at that point, right? Like I can't imagine a world in which a major league pitching staff would take their ace and turn them into the pitching coach. Like it's too valuable on the mound, right? So the flip side of all of this, maybe we can teach these competencies, right? But the flip side is, what about those high performers who don't have them? The phrase that I heard early in my career a lot is like, what do you do when Picasso wants to run the paint store? Like you've got high performers who may be very, very talented, very well educated, very successful in their role, especially technical roles. They want to develop their career too. And if we look at those people and say, well, we're not sure you're in that 30% of natural managers. Like, okay, well, do I not get a shot? Like, how do you keep those people engaged? What do you do for their career path to keep them in what they're really good at and make them feel valuable?
Yeah, this one I think is something that some companies have started to resolve. In my opinion, part of this is rooted in compensation structures. In that they have been built to say the only way you can get paid more money is if you manage people. And so these really high performers hit the ceiling of the compensation structure. And the answer is often, well, unless you're willing to manage people, we can't continue to give you raises. And so we get caught in that conundrum. But, there are possible structures to be created for individual contributor structures that allow compensation increases to mirror what exists for people who manage others, to move people into principal type positions, to, those types of roles. And you've seen that over the last decade plus, and, that has started to become a little bit more normalized. Crystal, I don't know what your experience has been with something like that.
My experience largely has been around trying to create those pathways for companies who are like, hey, we can't lose this talent. But we also don't know what to do with them because we can only promote directors and vice presidents if they have teams underneath them. So for them, it was less about the money and more about like the career progression. I'm like, all right, well, there's a couple of companies who do this or have done this particularly well. Why can we not look at them? And one of them is an industry and one of them is a company. So industry, I think the financial banking world actually does this exceptionally well. Like you'll notice everybody is a vice president. They toss it around like candy. But there's a reason for that. Some of that is because we put respect into titles, right? So as both from an employment perspective and also as consumers of products and services, we tend to give more authority, respect, and attention to people higher up the rank because it's how we've been conditioned. So on the flip side of that, from an employment perspective, we crave that as part of the recognition that we are doing well in our career, right? It's a way to signal that we're growing and we're succeeding. So we had a client that just really struggled with this because they came from a real estate construction background. And so they had project managers everywhere. That wasn't a big deal. But to be above a project manager, you had to have a team, not just a set of projects. And I was like, why? Mm-hmm. What does it actually matter? Like, does the director interface with the clients? Well, no, not unless there's a problem. Okay, so could you not then have like project manager 2, project manager 3, then, project management director, project manager, like if you don't want director of in front of it, why can't you just stick the director or, project manager VP or something like that on the back end of it? Like, what does it actually matter? I mean, to drive that point home, I went and ordered a set of business cards where my business title went from chief strategist to dishwasher. It was like, does it fundamentally change my job, what I'm called? No. Does it fundamentally change how you see me if things are working the way they're supposed to be working? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, your title doesn't matter except to the person who has the title and the people they're interacting with. So from a client perspective, the more you elevate that title, the happier your client is likely to be because they're going to believe that you gave them special attention. And from an employment perspective, they're likely to stick around because you've given them a pathway to grow that doesn't involve managing people. Another company that did this was Textron. They had some serious engineering plan. I have a lot of Textron stories because my dad worked there for like 30 years, but they had some serious engineering talent that they didn't want to lose, but they have spent, and I think this is one of the things that makes Textron a really interesting company. They have spent tens of millions of dollars, probably more than that now, in training leadership, training management competencies, assessing for that kind of competencies so that they're not promoting ineffective managers or ineffective people that would be ineffective in management into those roles because they understand it doesn't just poison that one role, right? It poisons everyone underneath them. And so they're training for that. Like you learn and are trained to be a manager prior to moving into that role, which I think is fantastic and how most companies should work if you're promoting on plan as opposed to replacement, right? Like when you have to put somebody in that role because somebody just left, like that's one thing, right? But if you're really succession planning the way that you should be developing managers well beyond before they're actually needed to be. And Textron does a great job of that. Where they took this one particular engineer who really wanted to be in management, but was really not a good manager for all of the reasons that you were talking about, wanted more money, wanted the credentials, all of it, is they created an SME role. So it like literally titled around subject matter expert, right? And so it was like director SME over this specific thing that he did in the organization. And they kept bringing that up until he hit like a VP role. And it was like, well, that's it. That's as far as you can go because, that's most companies, right? Like you have one CEO and underneath that, you got all the things. But it was able to keep him in the job that he was doing in career for over 30 years. And that was a really good thing for the organization. They were able to get and make hundreds of millions of dollars off of a decision that cost them not even $1 million over the course of that career. Yeah. So we need to think in that macro term, I think, when we're looking at what can we do.
And I did something similar with a small size government contractor here in the DC area called NT Concepts. I worked with their CEO and CHRO on a couple of other unrelated projects. And then they came to me and said, listen, we're growing, but we want to keep the organization relatively flat. That's just a part of our belief. We don't want a lot of management levels. And we know we need to redo our compensation structure, but we want a pathway, particularly for our technical team, to be able to grow, have titles, because it's important in this Beltway environment, and for them to be able to progress. So we built parallel compensation structures, and I'm by no way means a compensation expert, but they trusted me because I got to know their company and their organization, in particularly the technical paths for technical experts to grow beyond the senior technologist into a principal, a senior principal, and a vice president level of engineering, of software technology, of whatever they might be, so that they still had that expertise. We weren't taking them out of doing the technical work of facing the customer, because that's very important in our space. I think I froze. And
You're okay.
Move forward that way. And it was really, really helpful for them. And they were able to maintain their key technical staff without having them manage people, which they were very specific. I don't want some of these people managing people, but we want them to stay here. Yeah. And it was very popular. Their CHRO actually submitted it to an award with Virginia Sherm and won for unique compensation structure. And she was very, very proud of what they were able to do.
As you should be. I mean, because what you're really talking about there is looking at what are the needs of our people and how do we serve them so that they have psychological safety at work and the ability to self-actualize and fulfill. And, that is one of two ways that I would say every organization needs to look at it. The other one is around building your employer brand, your communication, your EVP, all of those things around person environment fit instead of perceived value offerings, right? Because so much of what we do to attract any type of person, whether they're a manager or not, is based around subjective perceived value offerings, which are transient in nature and very subjective, right? Right. But when we look at things like personality and competencies, which we know is the cornerstones of leadership, right, or understanding those two pieces, that's not as subjective. I mean, competencies maybe a little bit, but that's not as subjective. So when we're building in pathways, when we look at somebody and say like, okay, but these are the competencies we need for people management, and these are the competencies we need for technical management, whatever that, piece is. If you have this, we can build a career path for you that doesn't necessarily have this piece in it if you're not meant to be in that piece. But that only really works if their value set is aligned within the work experience and organization. So those things really can't exist in silos. And right now they do. So companies need to start bringing those things back together and then looking at that pathway. Okay, well, what can we do from a people management side? Because we know it is so very important to have the right people managers in place. And then what can we do from the technical side and recognize that those things can be divorced from each other to a degree, right? Like that doesn't have to be in one role.
Right. And I mean, imagine the story you can tell externally as you're trying to attract talent that, we actually put effort into who we select to manage you. And, you come here and there is a whole process for how we select managers. And we care about that a lot because we know that more than 75% of you have left a job because of your manager. And we don't want that to be the reason that you would choose to leave us. We want you to come here and stay and thrive and put the right people as your manager who are going to motivate you and help you grow and make sure your workload is balanced and build trust with you and all of those important things. I mean, that's a heck of a story to be able to tell externally. And I don't see anybody telling that story as much research as I do on the stories people are telling.
No, absolutely. Like listening to you, it kind of brings me back to our pre-show conversations. And sorry, y'all don't get to hear that in the recordings, but we were talking about TV shows and Game of Thrones came up, and listening to you just now kind of brought me back to Littlefinger had this quote, and I use it a lot. But actually, I mess it up a lot. But the quote's really great. It's chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder. Many who try to climb it fail and never get to try again, right? The fall breaks them. And some are given a chance to climb and they cling to the realm or the gods or love or whatever it is. Like they cling to this idea that may or may, it's a construct, right? It may or may not be real. only the ladder is real, right? The climb is all that there is. Everything else is something that we've made up to justify the work, right? And so to me, what you're talking about here, like the way we look at leadership and management and all of that right now, and the selection around that is a pit, right?
Yes.
Like it's a pit, but leadership is if that's the ladder, then we have to look at like what are the constructs that we have to set around us in order to help people want to climb. Because the other problem that I see is generationally, and each generation is a little worse than the one before it. We go back and look at the experience our parents had, right? And so you have Gen X who said, okay, my parents gave everything they could to the company and they were the company men. Literally, that is the phrase that's used with them as it relates to work. And they didn't get anything for it except for a gold watch. That sucks. I don't want to do that. Our kids turned around and looked at us and said, you just worked all kinds of crazy hours in order to like grow and succeed and do all of these things. And your company had no problem dropping you on your butt the first time that it was convenient for them, or they needed it to make a stockholder report look better. I don't want to do that. So then now you've got the current iteration of managers, like new managers coming up saying like, I'm not going to give you my life company. Like I'll manage, but at 40 hours, like I'm done and I'm going to go on vacation and play with my kids and all of the things, right? And so each generation seems to be a little further removed from wanting that, management company man, like work ethic that companies expect to go along with those titles and raises. And we haven't figured out how to fix that part of the ladder yet. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, that is a really good point. And, I don't know that I have any ideas on that one.
Future episode. There we go.
I think it is because, I think it's back to all of this is a relationship. We're all humans here, and, setting the expectations and being clear about the expectations up front. If you are an organization that is expecting people to work more than 40 hours a week, tell them that. Before they take the job so they can make an informed decision. And if that's not right for them, they're particularly, Gen Z, most millennials are going to take their little feet and walk right away and say, that's not what I want. And let's be very clear about what those expectations are. And that's a management principle that we all should know. If you don't know what I expect from you, how can you perform it? And then I can't get mad at you when you don't perform it. Right. So companies need to be very clear. And that's part about being clear in your messaging and your branding when you're hiring. So people who don't want that can self-select away, and the people who are comfortable with it can come into your funnel.
So and there are. So I think they do that because people believe, like the people inside of companies believe, well, no one's going to want to work more than X. But there are people who do. Like there are people who love what they do and they work all the time. Much to my family's chagrin, I am one of those people, right? But I'm not unique. There's lots of people like that.
And then you think of the people that work at nonprofits. They are so committed to what it is that they would do. They will work up and down all the hours that there are for very little pay. And and there are people that work in high paying jobs that love what they do, that will work up and down in all the hours for what they do. Like, let's be honest about it and let's talk about it.
Sure.
And so people can choose. And when people are no longer choosing you because that's what you expect, this is supply and demand.
Right. Like it's time to re-engineer your expectations. Yeah,
exactly. And when you don't have a supply of candidates for the demand of positions you have to take a hard look at yourself and change what you're doing.
Of course, the cynic in me says, well, that's why we're getting replaced with AI, except we're not really getting replaced with AI. I don't buy into that. I mean, some people will be, but not at scale, not yet.
You're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by somebody in your role who knows how to use AI.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. And all of this, when we talk about the individual contributors, like my brain pulls up an old episode of Cheers where like Woody wanted more money. So he goes to talk to Rebecca and her immediate reaction is like, don't come and ask me for a job title increase. I can't give it to you. He said, well, I wasn't. I was asking for money. She's like, oh, I can give you money, but I can't like give you a bigger title. He's like, but why not? She's like, well, I just can't. So the whole thing became a discussion about his title rather than his pay. So he didn't get his raise, but he got head bartender. So he went out, he's very excited. And then Sam got very upset on his behalf because he didn't get his raise. So he went in and came out a couple seconds later as the senior head bartender. So it's very clever on her part. But, you know, titles have power. They always have, especially in the sitcom world. Okay, so good stuff, good discussion. We've got a couple topics for future episodes, which is always very fun. But we get to my favorite part of the show, which is where we get a little bit personal, and we ask you for some of your own background, some of the things you've learned about yourself, some things you've changed. This is the segment we call Go Unfuck Yourself. So, you know, what we look for here is like, what's something you've changed about yourself, the way you work, especially if it's about this topic, that you've looked at your own path, at your own history and said, you know what? There's something here I need to shift to become more effective.
Yeah. So I actually write about this in the book. So everyone that wants to go buy the book, you can read this whole story. So
this book right here?
Talent
Is this the book?
That book right there. So, you know, at the height of my own management career, I did lead talent acquisition at SAIC. And so we probably had about a little over 200 recruiters. At one point, I did promote somebody into a recruiting manager job based on being a top performer, and quickly learned that that was a really bad idea because she didn't have the natural propensity for some of the management roles, and I had people on her team quit. And, you know, that was a big wake up call for me. And that was really the point in my career when I truly kind of dug into competencies in the deepest way possible. You know, I had been for some years, you know, certified in DDI from, you know, a interview perspective, but it was more like checking the boxes. And so it really kind of changed the way I truly think about, you know, profiles of roles and the difference between, you know, management roles and every other role that is out there. And it kind of set me on this path. So, you know, that was a big wake up call for me, you know, and when you have teams that are that big, sometimes you don't pay nearly as much attention as you should, you know, and that was obviously the biggest team I've ever managed. And then I kind of came here to the vendor side of the house, and, you know, my team at HireClicks at its height was 8 people. And now I'm back on my own. So I don't manage anybody, which feels weird because I love kind of the development part and the mentorship part and those pieces. But, you know, that was definitely a huge wake up call. And, you know, when I was writing the book, my book coach, when I sent this section to her, she was like, I am shocked that you're telling like a failure story in your own book. And I'm like,
how else do you learn?
Right. And how else do you not make yourself seem real in your own book? So like, here you go. So
I wish that with both in work and in personal lives, like we put more emphasis on failure so that we could normalize it and make it okay. Right. I don't remember what book this was or magazine or whatever, but I remember reading about this lady that was talking about her career. I think it was the CEO of PepsiCo, but I wouldn't swear to it. But she was talking about how, like, when she was growing up, her father was always asking her, what did you fail at today? And so she would ask her children, like, you know, I want you to go try something. I don't care if you succeed, but we're going to talk about what you failed at today at the end of the day. And it kind of became their normalized dinner conversation. And I remember being really sad that my children were already grown, because I was like, I would totally do that now if I could, you know. Everybody would be a better parent after they've already raised their kids, right? But it's such a great thing to do. And I think it transfers over into work too. Like, if you can, one of the things that we try to do here is that, like, we don't care if you're successful for some round. Like, we care what you stick in front of a client, but you shouldn't stick it in front of the client before it gets reviewed internally. Anyway, none of us should do that.
Right.
So, you know, it's okay to fail. So we do try to talk about, like, did you try this? Did it work? And then we make it okay for them to say no.
Yeah.
Like, cool. Okay, well, what are we trying next? And if you're stumped, let's help you with that. You know, when we talk about leadership and management, I think the best way to be a good leader is to give people the space to grow, and you can't grow unless you fail.
100%. You're not learning if you're not failing.
That's right.
If you're just doing things you're safe and good at, then you might as well, I might as well curl up in a ball
and as a friend of mine once said to me, when you stopped trying to improve yourself, that's the moment you started to die.
Yes.
That feels like a good place to wrap this up.
That's our off ramp right there. All right, Kara, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you both.
Tell everybody, where do they find you and where do they find the book?
Yes. So you can find me at meritagetalent.com. And on LinkedIn, I am the only Kara Yarnot there. So I'm easy to find. And it's just Kara at Meritage Talent is my email. And the book is on Amazon. Talent Trifecta is on Amazon. And you can also, there's links to it from my website as well.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it from both of you. Good to see you.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
It's time to unfuck it. Thanks for tuning in, friends. Until next time, keep it real and unfuck it.